the law you just signed banning transgender female athletes from playing on women's school sports teams. Can you name one example of a transgender child trying to gain an unfair competitive advantage at a school there in West Virginia?
Well, Stephanie, I don't have that experience exactly to myself right now, but I will tell you this.
Not yourself, your state, sir. Can you give me one example of a transgender child trying to get an unfair advantage? Just one in your state. You signed a bill about it.
No, I can't really tell you one, but I can tell you this, Stephanie. I'm a coach, and I coach a girls' basketball team. And I can tell you that we all know what an absolute advantage boys would have playing against girls.
But, sir, you have no examples of this happening. Why would you take your time to do this? Let's talk about other things that I can give you examples of in your state. According to U.S. News and World Report, West Virginia ranks 45th in education, 47th in healthcare, 48th on the economy, and 50th in infrastructure. If you cannot name one single example for me of a child doing this, why would you make this a priority? I just named 4 things that would seem to me like a much bigger priority.
Well, Stephanie, I didn't make it a priority. It wasn't my bill.
You signed it.
I mean, it's just come to me, and I have absolutely signed it because I believe, from the standpoint of a coach, I believe that girls work so hard to obtain Title IX. And I do not have any idea now why we are trying to disadvantage them in participating in the sport that they put so much into. I don't know why we're doing that. This is not like it's a big priority to me. In fact, I think we only have 12. No, Stephanie, listen. I think we only have 12 kids, maybe in our state, that are transgender type kids. I mean, for crying out loud, Stephanie, I signed hundreds of bills. This is not a priority to me. But with all that, I would say I think that it would impose an unfair disadvantage on the girls. And so from that standpoint, I support it.
All right, then, sir. Thank you. And please come back when beyond anecdotal feelings as a coach, you can show me evidence where those young women are being disadvantaged in your state, because I can show you evidence about how ranking that low in education is disadvantaging young women and men in West Virginia. Thanks for your time.
This is MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle calling out West Virginia's Republican Governor Jim Justice in the aftermath of him signing into law a bill banning trans women from playing on women's sports teams. And the reason that Justice can't identify a single example is because there aren't examples. There are about 35 bills just like this one across the country limiting or prohibiting trans women from competing in women's athletics. Only when you ask proponents of these laws to cite instances where this is actually happening, they can't. The only practical effect of bills like this one is that just a few children become politicized targets. And in a community like the trans community, where suicide rates are disproportionately high, turning the national spotlight onto innocent kids for the crime of wanting to live their lives in a way that corresponds to their gender identity isn't just unhelpful, it's dangerous. And it'll undoubtedly lead to more deaths amid a population that should be getting support, not ridicule. But then leave it to the pro-life party to stake out a position that'll result in more deaths. Leave it to the party of so-called constitutionalists to ensure that not quite everyone is entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jim Justice even admits that there are only 12 kids who are trans in the state of West Virginia. 12 kids. Now, whether that stat is accurate is another thing, but the point is that this is a law passed by the West Virginia legislature and signed by the governor targeting 12 children. And I'm not going to make judgments about how easy or difficult it may be to grow up trans anywhere, much less West Virginia, but I would imagine it's probably not the easiest thing in the world. And I would also imagine that having the entire state government pass bills specifically targeting you, almost individually, isn't going to make things any easier. If you want to talk about shameless, Justice even invokes Title IX, a civil rights law prohibiting discrimination based on sex. Think about that. He's using a law intended to prevent discrimination to one class to justify discrimination against another. And by the way, while Republican politicians like Jim Justice have anointed themselves the arbiters of sports, consider that actual experts have conceded that these laws aren't even rooted in fact. Dr. Eric Villain, an advisor to both the International Olympic Committee and the NCAA, says these laws generally aren't based in scientific evidence, but rather target women who have either a different biology or simply look different. The point of these bills is obvious, both to their opponents and especially to their supporters. Like Stephanie Ruhle said, it would seem to me that passing bills focusing on actual problems might be a better use of the legislature and governor's time. Maybe bills investing in education, where West Virginia ranks 45th, or healthcare, where they rank 47th, or the economy, where they rank 48th, or infrastructure, where they rank dead last. Maybe the reason that those rankings are so low is because the people in charge are focused on non-existent problems. Or maybe it's because a state whose priority is discriminating against vulnerable people, kids no less, isn't exactly going to be a hub for businesses to employ the best and brightest. There's actually a long history of money being drained from states because of discriminatory bills. In 2017, North Carolina Republicans passed a controversial bill called HB 2, which overturned and banned local statutes that protect LGBTQ people from discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity, and it prohibited trans people from using bathrooms and locker rooms that align with their gender identity in schools and government buildings, all due to the baseless myth that letting trans people use the bathroom or locker for their gender identity would lead to men pretending to be trans so as to sexually harass and assault women in women's facilities. The bill was ultimately dubbed the bathroom bill, and that blatantly discriminatory bill cost the state nearly $4 billion. PayPal bailed on a plan to build a facility there, concerts were canceled, Lionsgate backed out of plans in the state, the NCAA removed North Carolina as a host for any events up to 2022, the NAACP instituted a national economic boycott, and projects were canceled by CoStar, Deutsche Bank, and Adidas. In other words, it's already been proven that passing discriminatory laws doesn't actually solve the problem it purports to solve, and furthermore, it ends up costing the state enormously, thereby actually hurting everyone. And in a state like West Virginia, already hurting on so many fronts, from infrastructure to the economy, the effects of making a move like this are amplified even further. In reality, this is just the latest front in a never-ending culture war waged against vulnerable populations by the Republican Party. It is the natural progression of a party that only 5 minutes ago was all in trying to ban gay marriage. One vulnerable population after the next is targeted by Republicans, from Mexicans to Muslims to LGBT Americans to the trans community specifically, because their entire political philosophy is couched in fear. It's making sure that you're afraid of something, making sure to elicit some emotional response and make you think that non-existent issues are actually the most important issues, because it takes your attention away from the fact that they're on the wrong side of the issues that actually matter. And so by spouting off about trans children, they don't have to talk about the fact that they're only in favor of lowering taxes for millionaires and billionaires and corporations, which 70% of Americans oppose. They don't have to talk about the fact that they've aligned themselves with polluters in the fight to combat climate change, another position that the majority of Americans oppose. They don't have to talk about the fact that they're against women's reproductive rights, they're against universal background checks for gun sales, they're against voting rights, they're against significant stimulus checks, all of which are popular with Americans. The fact is that Republicans need insignificant, oftentimes mythological wedge issues to distract you from the fact that their actual agenda on items that actually impact you is woefully unpopular. And if they had to run on their own platform, they would lose every single time. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. And for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I discuss the week's top stories and interview major players in the world of politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.